Chosen one, this is the last time heaven will ask you, not as a threat meant to frighten you into compliance, but as an honest statement about how persistent invitations tend to work, arriving gently at first, then more directly, and eventually needing to be received or else quietly redirected toward whatever comes next, whether that means continued waiting on your part, or simply life moving forward without the specific resolution this particular invitation has been offering. Stay with this message. Do not close it and return to whatever else was occupying your attention a moment ago. Something has been asking for your genuine response for some time now, and this message exists to bring that asking fully into your conscious awareness, one final time, with enough clarity that you can no longer easily overlook it or postpone your genuine engagement with it any further. Breathe slowly. Let your body settle into stillness. Whatever has filled your attention recently, set it aside for these next few minutes, because what follows deserves genuine presence rather than the passing, distracted engagement most content receives during an ordinary day. Here is what this message means by heaven asking, described in grounded, honest terms rather than vague, mysterious language that generates emotion without offering genuine understanding. Somewhere in your life, a specific invitation has been present for some time, a persistent sense that something needs your attention, your courage, your genuine engagement, arriving through repeated inner nudges, through circumstances that keep pointing toward the same underlying matter, through a quiet but consistent feeling that something remains unresolved and asking to be addressed. This asking has likely arrived in stages, gently at first, easy to dismiss as unimportant or inconvenient, then gradually more insistent, harder to ignore, though still relatively easy to postpone given whatever else felt more immediately urgent in your daily life. This message represents what might genuinely be the final, most direct stage of this asking, not because some external force has decided to give up on you afterward, but because continued postponement, at a certain point, tends to become significantly more costly than continued waiting was during earlier stages, when genuine choice remained more fully and easily available to you. Reflect honestly on what specifically this asking has actually been about in your own particular life. Perhaps a relationship that has needed honest attention for some time, whether repair, honest conversation, or honest release. Perhaps a calling or purpose that has been quietly insisting on your attention, deserving more serious engagement than the passing consideration it has likely received up until now. Perhaps a piece of healing, a pattern, a wound, a fear, that has been asking to be finally addressed directly rather than continuing to be managed indirectly through avoidance and distraction. Perhaps a specific decision that has remained suspended in ambiguity for far longer than the actual complexity of the decision itself would seem to genuinely require. Give yourself genuine time with this reflection, rather than settling immediately for the first, most obvious answer that comes to mind. Sometimes the matter that most immediately presents itself is indeed the correct one, deserving your full attention throughout the remainder of this reflection. But sometimes a quieter, less immediately obvious matter actually carries greater significance, overlooked initially simply because it has learned to operate more subtly within your awareness, compared to whatever more prominent concern first arose when you began considering this particular question. Whatever specific matter arose as you considered these possibilities, hold it clearly in mind as you continue through this reflection, because this is very likely what this message means when it describes heaven asking one final time for your genuine response. Here is something worth understanding about why this particular asking has reached what feels like a final, more urgent stage, rather than continuing indefinitely in its earlier, gentler form. Persistent invitations of this kind typically follow a pattern, not because some external force grows impatient or vindictive, but because the underlying situation itself tends to change over time, sometimes making genuine engagement progressively more difficult, sometimes simply reaching a natural point where continued postponement no longer represents a neutral choice but has instead become its own kind of decision, effectively choosing avoidance and its consequences over genuine engagement. And whatever it might have offered instead. Picture a garden left unattended, gradually shifting from a state where a few minutes of regular attention would maintain it easily, toward a state where the accumulated neglect has made restoration significantly more demanding than the original, ongoing maintenance would ever have required. This same pattern often applies to significant matters left unaddressed over an extended period, the ease of genuine engagement gradually diminishing the longer avoidance continues, making the specific moment of finally choosing engagement, whenever it eventually occurs, feel disproportionately significant precisely because so much accumulated neglect has made continued postponement increasingly untenable. Reflect on whether the specific matter you have identified has itself been changing over recent months, whether continued postponement has made genuine engagement progressively harder rather than easier, whether circumstances surrounding this matter have been shifting in ways that suggest a narrowing window for the kind of response this asking has been seeking from you. This kind of honest reflection can help you understand, concretely, why this particular moment specifically deserves the urgency this message is asking you to bring to it, rather than simply accepting that urgency abstractly without genuine examination of your own particular circumstances. Here is something important to understand about what genuinely responding to this asking requires, since simply acknowledging its existence abstractly, without concrete engagement, accomplishes relatively little toward actual resolution. Genuine response requires naming, specifically and honestly, what this asking has actually been requesting of you, translating vague spiritual language into something concrete enough to actually act upon. If your identified matter involves a relationship, name specifically what response has been needed. Perhaps direct, honest communication about something that has remained unspoken. Perhaps a specific act of repair or reconciliation. Perhaps honest acknowledgement that a particular relationship has run its course and deserves conscious, honest closure rather than continued ambiguous maintenance that serves neither party well. If your identified matter involves calling or purpose, name specifically what genuine engagement would actually involve, in concrete terms rather than continued vague longing. What specific first step, however small, would represent authentic movement toward whatever this calling genuinely involves, rather than continued contemplation without corresponding action? If your identified matter involves healing or an internal pattern, name specifically what this asking has been requesting. Perhaps professional support you have been postponing. Perhaps honest, direct engagement with a specific memory or emotion you have been avoiding. Perhaps simply consistent, deliberate practice interrupting a pattern you have long recognized but never fully committed to changing. If your identified matter involves a suspended decision, name specifically what genuine resolution would actually look like, recognizing that continued ambiguity, however comfortable it may have become through repetition, represents its own kind of decision, effectively choosing to remain uncommitted rather than genuinely resolving the matter one way or another. Here is something worth understanding about why immediate engagement matters specifically at this particular moment, rather than continuing to treat this asking as something that can reasonably be postponed once again toward some indefinite future point when circumstances feel more convenient. Consider honestly how many times this same matter has already surfaced in your awareness, how many previous moments of clarity or recognition have already occurred regarding this same underlying asking, only to fade again once ordinary daily demands reclaimed your attention. Try to actually count, as best you honestly can, how many times something resembling this current moment of recognition has previously occurred regarding this same particular matter. A thought that arose, was noticed, perhaps even briefly acted upon in some small way, before eventually fading back into the pattern of ordinary avoidance and postponement. This kind of honest accounting, however imprecise, can help illustrate concretely the actual scope of this recurring pattern, rather than allowing it to remain a vague, general impression that fails to convey its true, accumulated significance. If this pattern of repeated recognition followed by repeated postponement has already occurred multiple times regarding this same matter, this message's emphasis on finality deserves genuine consideration rather than dismissal. Patterns that repeat indefinitely without ever producing genuine resolution tend not to resolve themselves eventually through simple continued repetition. They typically require a deliberate, conscious interruption, a moment where the pattern itself is recognized clearly enough, and taken seriously enough, that genuine, different action finally follows rather than simply another instance of the same familiar cycle. Consider whether this message, arriving today, might represent exactly this kind of opportunity for interruption, not because this particular message carries any special power beyond countless similar previous moments of recognition, but because you, specifically, might finally be ready to respond differently than you have responded to previous similar moments, bringing genuine, sustained follow-through rather than continuing the familiar pattern of temporary recognition followed by renewed postponement. Here is something worth understanding about the specific fear that likely underlies whatever postponement has characterized your relationship with this particular matter up until now. Fear rarely operates as simple, singular hesitation. It typically involves several layers, worth examining individually rather than treated only as one undifferentiated resistance blocking genuine engagement. There is often fear of the specific outcome itself, worrying that genuine engagement will produce a result you do not want, whether rejection, failure, disappointment, or simply confirmation of something difficult you have been avoiding fully acknowledging. There is often fear of the process itself, the discomfort genuine engagement typically requires, difficult conversations, vulnerable admissions, sustained effort that may prove more demanding than continued avoidance currently feels. There is often fear of what genuine engagement might require you to subsequently change, recognizing that authentic response to this asking may not remain contained to this single matter alone, but might instead ripple outward into other areas of your life that have quietly organized themselves around your continued avoidance of this particular matter. Reflect honestly on which of these specific fears, or what combination, feels most relevant to your own particular situation. Naming this fear clearly, rather than experiencing it only as vague, undifferentiated resistance, tends to make it significantly more workable, allowing genuine examination rather than simply continuing to be controlled by its diffuse presence operating quietly in the background of your ongoing hesitation. Here is something worth understanding about how you might genuinely examine and work with whatever specific fear you have identified, rather than simply continuing to be controlled by it indefinitely without direct, honest engagement. Ask yourself, honestly, how likely the specific feared outcome actually is, based on genuine evidence rather than anxious imagination generating worst-case scenarios without adequate grounding in actual probability or precedent from your own life experience. Ask yourself, too, whether you would genuinely be unable to handle this feared outcome even if it did occur, given everything you have already survived and handled throughout your life up to this point. Most people, examining this question honestly rather than simply accepting their anxious assumption without genuine scrutiny, discover they possess significantly more resilience and capability than their fear typically credits them with, evidence drawn directly from their own accumulated life experience rather than theoretical reassurance offered without genuine grounding in personal history. Consider, as well, what the actual cost of continued postponement genuinely amounts to, compared honestly against the cost of whatever specific outcome you have been fearing through that ongoing postponement. Sometimes, when genuinely examined side by side rather than left in vague comparison, the accumulated cost of extended avoidance proves significantly higher than the cost of the specific feared outcome that avoidance has been protecting against, a comparison worth making explicitly rather than allowing fear of one specific negative possibility to obscure the genuine, ongoing cost of the alternative pattern you have actually been living within. Here is something worth understanding about what genuine response to this final asking might look like in practical terms, since this message is not suggesting reckless, impulsive action taken without any genuine thought or consideration. Genuine response involves honest reflection followed by concrete, deliberate action, translating whatever clarity has emerged through this reflection into actual, practical engagement with your real circumstances, rather than either impulsive action without adequate consideration, or continued postponement disguised as ongoing careful deliberation that never actually produces genuine resolution. Consider what specific action, however small, would represent authentic response to this asking, something you could genuinely begin within the next day rather than continuing to postpone towards some indefinite future point that never quite arrives. This does not need to represent the complete resolution of whatever matter you have identified. It simply needs to represent real, concrete movement, evidence that this particular moment of recognition has actually translated into meaningful action rather than remaining purely theoretical. Here is something worth understanding about support during this process of genuine response, since translating internal clarity into concrete action often proves significantly easier with appropriate support rather than attempted entirely in isolation. Consider who in your life might serve as a valuable source of encouragement as you begin genuinely engaging with whatever this asking has been requesting, someone capable of offering genuine, non-judgmental presence as you navigate whatever specific action feels most immediately relevant to your particular situation. If professional support feels relevant to your specific matter, whether therapeutic support for healing work, career coaching for purpose-related matters, or other appropriate professional resources, consider this a legitimate and valuable part of genuine response, rather than viewing it as somehow separate from or less significant than purely personal effort and determination alone. Here is something worth understanding about doubt, since doubt likely has arisen at some point during this reflection, questioning whether this message's central claim genuinely applies to your own specific situation, or whether it simply represents generic spiritual encouragement offered broadly without genuine connection to your actual, particular circumstances. This doubt deserves honest acknowledgement rather than automatic dismissal, though it also deserves genuine examination rather than uncritical acceptance as necessarily representing the complete truth of the matter. Consider whether your own doubt reflects genuine, careful evaluation concluding that no significant matter genuinely applies to your current circumstances, or whether it reflects something else, perhaps the very avoidance pattern this message has been describing throughout, manifesting specifically as skepticism toward the message itself rather than genuine, honest engagement with whatever matter might actually be relevant to your particular life and circumstances. Here is a further consideration worth holding as you continue engaging with whatever matter this reflection has helped you identify. Genuine response to this asking does not require certainty about exactly how everything will unfold once you begin engaging directly. It simply requires sufficient clarity about the genuine significance of this particular matter, and sufficient willingness to begin moving forward despite remaining uncertainty about specific details and eventual outcomes. Consider what it would mean to hold both genuine uncertainty about outcomes and genuine commitment to beginning the process simultaneously, rather than requiring complete certainty before allowing yourself to take even the first, smallest step forward. Most genuinely significant undertakings begin this way, with real uncertainty about eventual outcomes accompanying genuine commitment to beginning the process regardless of that uncertainty, trusting that clarity regarding subsequent steps will develop progressively as the process itself continues to unfold. Here is something worth understanding about the specific language you might use internally as you approach this particular moment of decision, since internal language shapes experience and subsequent action significantly more than most people initially recognize. If your internal language currently frames this moment primarily through fear, emphasizing everything that could go wrong, consider whether shifting toward more balanced language, acknowledging genuine risk alongside genuine potential benefit, might actually better reflect the honest reality of your particular situation rather than the distorted, fear-amplified version that anxious internal narration often produces. This shift does not require forcing false, unrealistic optimism that denies genuine risk or difficulty. It simply involves examining whether your current internal narrative has become disproportionately weighted toward fear, compared to a more balanced, honest assessment that would include genuine potential positive outcomes alongside whatever genuine risks and difficulties actually exist within your particular situation. Here is something worth understanding about what genuinely changes once you have finally responded to this asking, translating recognition into concrete action rather than continuing the pattern of postponement that has likely characterized your relationship with this particular matter until now. Many people report significant relief following genuine engagement, even when that engagement involves real, ongoing challenges and difficulties that do not immediately and completely resolve simply through the act of beginning. This relief stems not from the absence of difficulty, but from the absence of the particular exhaustion that prolonged avoidance and postponement typically produces, mental and emotional energy previa. Sly consumed by continued deliberation and avoidance becoming available instead for the different, often more manageable work of actually engaging with whatever genuine challenges this particular matter involves once directly and honestly addressed. Consider the specific role that timing plays in your own particular situation, since not every significant matter genuinely requires the same degree of immediate urgency this message has been emphasizing throughout its content. Some matters genuinely benefit from continued patience and gradual development. Others, particularly those that have already been circling in your awareness for an extended period without ever reaching resolution, tend to benefit more from decisive engagement than from additional patient waiting that has, by this point, likely already extended well beyond what genuine patience would reasonably require. Reflect honestly on how long the specific matter you have identified has actually been present in your awareness, whether weeks, months, or perhaps even years. If this timeline extends considerably longer than feels reasonable for genuine, patient development to naturally unfold, this itself suggests that continued waiting has likely shifted from patient wisdom into something closer to habitual avoidance, deserving the more direct, decisive engagement this message has been encouraging throughout its content. Examine, too, what specific relationship exists between this particular matter and your broader sense of self and identity, since matters connected more deeply to core identity often generate more intense avoidance than matters that remain more peripheral to how you fundamentally understand yourself. If your identified matter connects to something central regarding who you understand yourself to be, this deeper connection likely explains at least part of why avoidance has persisted so consistently, since engaging directly with matters connected to core identity often feels significantly more threatening than engaging with more peripheral concerns that carry less fundamental significance for your overall sense of self. Consider what it would mean to engage with this particular matter while holding your core identity and worth as fundamentally secure, separate from whatever specific outcome eventually results from genuine engagement. This separation, distinguishing your fundamental worth from the specific outcome of any particular decision or action, often makes genuine engagement significantly more accessible, since the stakes, while still genuinely significant, no longer carry the same existential weight that conflating outcome with fundamental identity and worth typically produces. Think about what specific support system currently exists in your life, beyond simply one individual person who might offer encouragement, since broader support networks often provide resilience that a single supportive relationship alone cannot fully offer. Consider whether community, whether formal or informal, whether connected to shared values, shared circumstances, or simply shared humanity, might offer valuable additional support as you continue engaging with whatever this final asking has helped you identify throughout this reflection. Reflect, as well, on what role your own physical and emotional well-being plays in your current capacity for genuine engagement, since chronic exhaustion, poor physical health, or significant ongoing emotional distress can genuinely limit available capacity for the kind of courageous, sustained engagement this particular matter likely requires. If your own well-being has been significantly neglected recently, consider whether some attention to rest, basic self-care, and emotional support might actually represent an important, if less obviously direct, part of genuinely preparing yourself for the more direct engagement this message has been encouraging throughout its content. Here is a final significant consideration before this message moves toward its close. This persistent asking, however long it has continued and however urgent this particular message's tone has become, has not persisted because something is wrong with you, or because you have somehow failed by not yet responding fully until this current moment. Persistent invitations of this kind simply reflect genuine significance, something worth continuing to seek your attention precisely because it matters, rather than reflecting any deficiency or failure on your part for having not yet fully engaged with it up until now. Release whatever shame or self-criticism might have accumulated regarding your previous postponement of this particular matter. Shame does not accelerate genuine engagement. It simply adds unnecessary additional weight on top of whatever difficulty already exists in facing this matter directly. Approach this moment instead with genuine self-compassion, recognizing that postponement in the face of significant, meaningful invitations is an extremely common human pattern, alongside genuine readiness to finally respond differently than you have responded to similar previous opportunities for genuine engagement. Before this message reaches its true close, take one final moment for yourself, genuinely absorbing what has emerged throughout this reflection rather than rushing immediately toward whatever comes next in your day. Name, specifically, what this final asking has actually been about in your own particular life. Name, specifically, the concrete action you intend to take within the next day, moving this matter from the category of things perpetually postponed into the category of things actively, genuinely being addressed. This does not need to feel dramatic or overwhelming in order to matter significantly. It simply needs to feel genuine, real engagement rather than another moment of temporary reflection quickly forgotten once this message ends and your attention naturally returns to whatever else occupies your ordinary day. Trust that this particular message reached you today for a genuine reason, connecting specifically to something already present and asking within your own awareness, rather than arriving randomly or without relevance to your actual life circumstances. Something in you recognized enough significance to continue reading this far, past the point where you might have closed this message earlier had it genuinely carried no connection to anything significant currently present in your own life. Consider, too, what it might mean to continue checking in with yourself over the coming days regarding whatever response you have begun today, recognizing that genuine follow-through often requires sustained engagement beyond this single initial moment of reflection and commitment. Perhaps setting aside a few minutes each day, or each week, to honestly assess whether you are continuing to move forward with whatever process this reflection has helped you begin, rather than allowing initial motivation to simply fade once the immediate impact of this particular message has passed and ordinary daily life reasserts its usual claim on your attention. Reflect, as well, on how you will handle the inevitable moments of doubt or difficulty that are likely to arise as you continue this process beyond today, moments when the clarity you feel right now begins to feel more distant or uncertain amid the ordinary demands and complications of daily life. These moments of doubt do not indicate that your original recognition was somehow mistaken. They simply reflect the natural fluctuation that accompanies any genuine process of significant engagement and change, particularly during its early stages before concrete, sustained progress has had sufficient time to develop and become clearly apparent. When these moments of doubt eventually arise, consider returning to this specific reflection, rereading whatever sections felt most significant during this initial encounter, allowing the content to reinforce your original commitment even as its initial emotional intensity has naturally softened somewhat with the passage of time. Consider, 2. Reaching out to whatever support person you have identified, sharing the specific doubt currently being experienced rather than allowing it to operate silently, potentially derailing your continued engagement without ever being brought into open, honest conversation with someone who might offer valuable perspective or encouragement. Consider what specific obstacles are most likely to arise as you continue translating today's recognition into sustained action over the coming weeks, obstacles worth anticipating now rather than being caught entirely unprepared when they eventually arise. Practical complications that make continued follow-through more difficult than it seemed during this initial moment of clarity. Old patterns of avoidance attempting to reassert themselves, particularly once the immediate emotional impact of this message begins to fade. Whatever specific obstacle feels most likely for your own particular situation, briefly considering in advance how you might respond to it can help you navigate it more effectively when it actually arises, rather than being caught entirely unprepared by a difficulty you had not previously considered. Think about what genuine progress will actually look like over the coming weeks, recognizing that most significant matters worth genuinely addressing rarely resolve completely within a single conversation or action. Progress more often looks like continued, honest engagement over time, gradual movement toward genuine resolution, even if that resolution takes considerably longer to fully develop than you might initially hope given the intensity of clarity present in this particular moment of first receiving this message. Consider, too, what specific record you might keep as you continue this process beyond today, some form of documentation that allows you to track genuine progress over time rather than relying purely on memory to preserve the clarity and commitment you feel right now. This does not need to be elaborate. A simple note, written somewhere you will actually encounter again, briefly describing what this asking has been about and the action you intend to take, can serve as valuable evidence later, helping you track whether genuine follow-through has actually occurred, or whether this particular recognition has simply joined the pattern of previous recognitions that faded without producing lasting change. Reflect on what genuine success actually looks like as you continue moving forward from this final asking, recognizing that success rarely means instant, complete resolution achieved within a single conversation or action. Success more often looks like consistent, honest engagement over time, gradual movement in the direction of genuine resolution, even if that resolution takes considerably longer to fully develop than the intensity of clarity present in this particular moment might currently suggest. Consider, finally, what it would mean to trust that this asking, whatever specific form it has taken in your own particular circumstances, has persisted out of genuine significance rather than any arbitrary or coercive intention. Whatever has been asking for your attention continues doing so because it recognizes something valuable available to you specifically, something worth continuing to offer even amid repeated postponement, arriving now, one final time, with enough clarity and directness that genuine response finally becomes possible rather than remaining indefinitely deferred. There is one more layer worth adding before this message truly comes to its close, something practical that ties everything shared today into sustained, meaningful engagement over the coming days and weeks ahead, ensuring this genuinely final asking actually produces the lasting response it has been seeking rather than becoming simply one more instance of temporary recognition quickly forgotten. Consider what specific daily practice might help you maintain connection to whatever clarity has emerged through this particular reflection, something brief enough to sustain consistently rather than elaborate enough to likely be abandoned once initial motivation naturally diminishes over time. Perhaps a few minutes each morning, briefly recommitting to whatever action you have identified as your genuine response to this final asking. Perhaps a few minutes each evening, honestly reviewing whether that day's actions genuinely reflected the commitment made through this reflection, or whether old patterns of postponement began quietly reasserting themselves once again. Reflect on what specific evidence of genuine progress you might reasonably look for over the coming weeks, evidence that would help confirm authentic movement is actually occurring, even when that movement unfolds gradually rather than through one single, dramatic moment of complete resolution. Perhaps a growing sense of lightness or relief connected to whatever matter you have begun addressing. Perhaps concrete developments in whatever specific action you identified as your initial step forward. Perhaps simply an increased capacity to think and speak about this particular matter with greater ease and honesty than was previously available to you before this specific process of genuine engagement began. Consider, too, what specific role reflection and reassessment might play as this process continues unfolding beyond today. Genuine engagement with significant matters rarely proceeds in a perfectly smooth, predictable line from initial recognition through complete resolution. It typically involves periods of clear progress alongside periods where the path forward becomes temporarily less obvious, requiring renewed reflection and, sometimes, genuine reconsideration of the specific approach being taken, even while maintaining consistent commitment to the underlying, fundamental engagement with whatever matter this reflection has helped identify. Give yourself genuine permission for this kind of ongoing reassessment, distinguishing it clearly from the pattern of postponement and avoidance this message has been addressing throughout its content. Reassessment, engaged in honestly while maintaining consistent underlying commitment, represents healthy, adaptive engagement with a genuinely complex matter. Postponement, by contrast, involves avoiding genuine engagement altogether, using the appearance of careful consideration as sophisticated justification for continued inaction rather than genuine, if imperfect, forward movement. Explore, as well, what specific relationship you want to have with this particular matter 1 year from today, looking forward with genuine intention rather than simply hoping passively that circumstances will somehow resolve themselves without your continued, active participation. Picture, as specifically as you genuinely can, having engaged consistently and honestly with whatever this final asking has helped you identify, noticing what that engagement has likely produced by that point, whether complete resolution, significant progress, or simply a fundamentally different, more honest relationship with this particular matter than the pattern of avoidance that has likely characterized your relationship with it until this current moment. Consider what specific people in your life, beyond simply the one supportive individual already discussed earlier in this reflection, might benefit from knowing about your genuine commitment to this particular matter, people whose knowledge of your commitment might itself provide additional, valuable accountability supporting your continued follow-through over the coming weeks and months. This does not require sharing every detail with everyone in your life. It simply invites consideration of whether broader, appropriate transparency about your genuine commitment might serve your continued engagement more effectively than continuing to hold this process entirely privately, hidden from the broader network of relationships that could otherwise offer meaningful additional support. Reflect, too, on what specific obstacles from your own particular history have most consistently derailed previous attempts at similar significant engagement, whether related to this specific matter or to other significant matters you have faced throughout your life. Perhaps a pattern of losing motivation once initial difficulty arises. Perhaps a pattern of becoming overwhelmed by attempting too much too quickly, rather than sustaining more modest, consistent engagement over an extended period. Perhaps a pattern of allowing others' reactions or opinions to derail your own genuine commitment once that commitment becomes visible to people around you. Whatever specific pattern has most consistently interfered with your previous attempts at significant engagement, name it clearly now, and consider what specific strategy might help you navigate around this particular pattern more effectively this time, informed by honest reflection on your own particular history rather than generic advice that fails to account for your own specific, individual tendencies and challenges. Consider, finally, what genuine celebration might look like once you have taken that first concrete step. This message has been encouraging throughout its content, recognizing that acknowledging genuine progress, however small, tends to reinforce continued engagement far more effectively than moving immediately toward the next challenge without ever genuinely registering what has already been accomplished. This celebration does not need to be elaborate. It might simply mean pausing, briefly, to genuinely acknowledge to yourself that you responded, finally, to something that had been asking for your attention for quite some time, choosing engagement over continued avoidance, honesty over continued postponement. This message reached you today for a reason. Trust that. Carry it with you. And when you are ready, not before, not because anyone told you to, but when you are genuinely ready, take your next step. Deep down, you already know what that step is. Thank you for receiving this message today, for finally listening rather than allowing this asking to pass by unanswered one more time. Be gentle with yourself as you continue engaging with whatever has been waiting for your response, one honest, deliberate step at a time.